Welcome to this module on portfolio allocation using reinforcement learning. My name is Marie-Ève, I'm an Nevado lecturer, and we'll be covering the next topic together. We're going to put ourselves in the shoes of an investor. As an investor, what you want is to hit a certain target return for a given period of time. There might also be some additional constraints, like limiting the risk of the portfolio or limiting the transaction costs. In reinforcement learning, it's very typical to think of solving a problem as learning to play a game as well as possible. This video is filming the world champion at the game of AlphaGo playing against an RL agent trained by DeepMind. In this very game, the RL agent won, which was a big advancement for the field of reinforcement learning. So let's frame the portfolio allocation problem as a game, the game of portfolio allocation. Let's imagine that the goal is to achieve a target return of 5% in a time period of 2 days. The rules are that there are two assets you can invest in, asset 1 and asset 2. You can rebalance your portfolio every day, but the sum of the weights needs to be equal to 100% at the beginning of every day. Now let's play a hypothetical game. We're at the beginning of day 1. So what we have to do at this point is observe the current state of the market. What we're seeing here is that yesterday's returns was minus 5% for asset 1 and 2% for asset 2. So far, total portfolio return is 0%, which is normal because we just started playing. Then what we need to do is act and decide on what the portfolio allocation is going to be. Considering yesterday's returns, it would make sense to allocate more to asset 2 because it performed better. So with that being said, we're going to put 0% in asset 1 and 100% in asset 2. Then we need to wait until the day finishes and observe the current state of the market again. What we see is that today's return was 1% for asset 1 and 3% for asset 2. This leads us to a total portfolio of 3%, which is good because we're getting closer to our objective. And for this, we would get a thumbs up or a reward. It's now day 2, and as you would have guessed, we would do exactly the same thing. So we observe the current state. Yesterday's returns was 1% for asset 1 and 3% for asset 2. The total portfolio is still 3%. The next thing we have to do is to act again and decide on what the portfolio allocation is going to be. This time we're going to put 40% in asset 1 and 60% in asset 2. Then we again wait for the day to finish and observe today's return. This time we were a bit less lucky. We got 5% for asset 1 and minus 5% for asset 2. Unfortunately, this gives us a total portfolio return of 1%, and we're actually getting further away from our objective. And because it's the end of the game, we would get a negative reward and it's game over. The game of portfolio allocation, as we just saw it, was a very simplified version of what it would be in real life. We only had 2 assets and 2 days to achieve the goal. But a few things are important to remember. There's a clear investment goal. Decisions or actions need to be made sequentially. Each action has consequences. Rewards are attributed based on those consequences, whether positive or negative. Over time, the pattern leading up to a good decision should be learned by the agent making the decisions. Later in this course, we're going to implement our own RL algorithm. We're going to do this with a basket of 16 assets. It's going to be a variety of risk-return profiles like currencies, commodities, bonds, and stocks. The goal is to train a model that can take as input the past returns and output the action or the right portfolio allocation. Why? Because we want to win the game of portfolio allocation. In other words, we want to achieve the defined investment goals. At this point, you might be wondering what's the motivation for using reinforcement learning in portfolio allocation. Financial institutions are constantly issuing new exchange-traded funds called ETFs. There is a growing need to provide new investment products to investors using quantitative methods. Classic methods like minimum variance optimization or Markowitz have their limits. and RL can help push back on those limits by offering more scalability and the possibility to be more specific with investment constraints. We've introduced the use case of portfolio allocation using reinforcement learning. What's next is we're going to introduce reinforcement learning itself. We're going to do an overview of common problems in reinforcement learning. And last, we're going to do a tutorial using Python.